So first of all, I would like to say hello to everybody and to thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful event. And I would also like to thank Dirk Bakker, who could not be here today, for giving extremely precious advice for the studies I'm going to present you today. So the question I'm going to deal with is a very simple question that everybody who's working with dyslexia has to face. Are dyslexics all alike? Are they all the same, apart from obvious individual variation? And the answer, I think, could be considered as undisputable. No, they are not all the same. They are not all alike. But when we talk about differences in dyslexia, we can focus on different aspects. And many authors, many researchers have focused on different abilities or disabilities that characterize different dyslexic individuals, including linguistic abilities, ranging over many different subtypes or subfunctions of linguistic abilities, auditory abilities, visual abilities, motor abilities, and attentional abilities, and probably some others that I have forgot to mention at present. So we can say we agree about the statement that dyslexics are not all alike, but still there are several possibilities to deal with the different functions and hypothetical factors that have been focused upon by the different researchers. One possibility is, and we have had examples, I think, during the day of the various approaches to the different patterns of functions of strengths and weaknesses that are found in dyslexic individuals. So one possibility is to say that, okay, there are many functions in which we can find that dyslexics are impaired, but yet one function is the core function, is the core deficit, as it is often called, and all the others are associated disorders. So they are present in a certain percentage of dyslexic individuals, but they are not playing any causal role. They are not causing the reading deficit, although they may be caused by the same factor that causes the reading deficit. Another possibility is that there are several subtypes of dyslexia, and for each of these subtypes, the causal factor may be different. Still another possibility is that there is a common pattern of causal factors in dyslexia. So all individuals with dyslexia have the various characteristics or the various impairments which are the causal source of dyslexia. But these different functions or these different impairments can be evident to different extents in different individuals. So some can manifest more of a certain type of impairment, and others can manifest more of another type of impairment. But they're all more or less similar. I'm going to take the viewpoint that there are different subtypes of dyslexia and that different causal factors may be the origin of dyslexia in these subtypes. So if we go further and try to see what kind of proposals have been made to classify dyslexics according to different subtypes, we can see, well, I try to make another classification of classifications. One could be the subdivisions according to performance with different kinds of words, usually comparing reading words and non-words, or reading regular words and irregular words. And here you can find the classical distinctions between phonological and surface dyslexics, or the distinction that was already explained today between dyseidetic and dysphonetic readers, which had been proposed by Boder. Another subtyping procedure takes into account the development of reading ability. So we describe the pathway, the normal pathway of acquiring reading, and we try to determine what is the step where dyslexics have got stuck, and according to analytical kind of processing, whereas the right hemisphere subserves visual spatial functions and a more holistic, more global way of processing information. So the underlying principles of the balance model can be, as I said, led back to a developmental model which describes the process of learning to read as a first greater involvement of the right hemisphere in the reading process. So in the very first phases of learning to read, text is new, and we need to be very attentive, very focused on the visual spatial features of the text that we read. Whereas when we get familiar with the visual characteristics of the text, we can go a step further and try to take into account the linguistic characteristics of the text and try to guess, to anticipate what is the word that we are going to read on the basis, as I said, of the context of the sentence and of the characteristics of the word. And this calls into play the role of the left hemisphere. Some children, for some reason, fail to show this shift to left hemisphere greater involvement, and they keep relying on a thorough visual spatial analysis of the characteristics of the text. So they keep using the right hemisphere as the prevalent approach to reading. Whereas another group of children make the shift too early. So before they have automatized recognition, visual recognition of the letters or the words, they start to try to guess what's coming. And for this, they use their linguistic left hemisphere-based functions. M types, as I said, have the characteristics of both P and L types. So they have difficulties both in using visual strategies and in using linguistic strategies. And for this reason, as you will see, they usually show the most severe impairments in reading. So this idea of a shift from right hemisphere to left hemisphere, predominant involvement in reading, this idea has been proposed by Dirk Bakker quite a few years ago, and so it's not a new idea, but at the beginning it had been supported with ERP studies, so studies looking at electric activity of the brain during reading, but nowadays with the improvement in brain imaging technologies, we can see that there are many new studies, recent studies, which are still in support of this idea. For example, you can see this study. Unfortunately, it is not a study about reading. It is a study about a function which is supposed to be linked to reading, but for sure it has to do with reading somehow, which is a non-word rhyming task. You can see the hot spots, the red and yellow parts in the brain scans that you can see, are the ones where activity is increased with age. And the cold spots, so the blue and purple ones, are the brain areas where activity is decreasing with age. So in the first column, you see the brains of normal readers, and in the second column, you see the brains of dyslexic readers. So you can see that normally there is a decrease in right hemisphere activity. It is reversed, so right is on the left, sorry. And an increase in left hemisphere activity, but in the brains of dyslexic readers, there is not the same developmental pattern. So they keep activating their right hemisphere and also, to some extent, their left hemisphere during this kind of task. You could say, and it has been proposed, that the involvement of the right hemisphere has to do with compensation processes in dyslexia. So the use of the right hemisphere would be a way to compensate the functions of the left hemisphere, which are somehow not working as they should. And in fact, in this study by Shewitz and colleagues, you can see that in normal readers, there is, as we said, an activation in the left hemisphere, which is seen, although in slightly different areas, but still in the left hemisphere of dyslexic readers who did not improve during life. These are adults. Whereas dyslexic individuals who improved their reading skills during life show an increase in right hemisphere activation during, again, a rhyming task, so it is not directly reading. So activating the right hemisphere might be seen as a way to improve one's reading skills, although not in the normal, so to say, way. Other authors have focused more directly on reading tasks, and they have described, as stated by the balance model, that we can see a disengagement of the left hemisphere areas, of the right hemisphere areas during the first phases of reading, and the progressive greater engagement of the left hemisphere areas. And it has also been shown that children who are at risk for dyslexia have lower shifts or more limited shifts towards left hemisphere activity, and they keep showing a great right hemisphere activity. This is a very, very recent article that I read a couple of days ago, and I think it is important because not only does it confirm this progression towards a left hemisphere activation in normal readers, but it says that what is observed in dyslexic readers is not only that some of them activate the right hemisphere as a compensation process and some of them don't, but that this kind of activation is modulated by variables which have to do with age and also with the kind of task and the kind of materials that is proposed. So, for example, for high imageability words, all of the readers show a greater involvement of right hemisphere with visual spatial processing, whereas low imageability words tend to involve the left hemisphere more. And this is one of the principles which is followed in intervention programs for dyslexia as proposed by the balance model. I will show you some data about studies which have been conducted on Italian children. We have data on 123 dyslexic children aged between 7 and 15 years, classified as P, L, or M types according to the following formula. So P-type, if reading speed is lower than 1 standard deviation below the mean, and the percentage of time-consuming errors is at least 60%. L-types, if the reading speed is not so bad, so it is above 1 standard deviation below the mean, and their substantive errors are at least 60%, and M-types in all other cases. These children with dyslexia were administered a series of tests, including text reading, word and non-word reading, word, non-word, and sentence writing to dictation, phonemic awareness tasks, including blending and elision, and a series of verbal memory tests, including memory for words, letter and digit spans, forward and backward. And a test of callosal transfer, so of transfer of information from one hemisphere to the other, which was done through the tactual modality, having to reproduce the exact finger that had been touched by the researcher. We also have another set of data, including only 20 subjects, about auditory processing, including non-verbal and verbal stimuli. So we had tasks where the children had to reproduce sequences of simple tones, including couples of tones or longer sequences of tones, varying for duration and for intervals between the stimuli, because there is a whole domain of theories and experimental research showing that the length of the stimuli and the length of the interval which separates the stimuli can play a crucial role in creating or not creating difficulties for children with language impairments or with reading impairments. We also had tasks of discrimination and categorization of verbal stimuli. In this case, it was digitally recorded words that had to be either, as I said, discriminated, so are they same or different, or they had to be matched with figures showing their meaning. And this, so now I'm going to present you the results of this set of studies. So remember that we had selected and classified the children just according to their reading speed and kind of errors they made during reading. Accordingly, we find significant differences in reading accuracy with P-types being more correct in general, and especially more correct than M-types, and again, especially in word reading. So this is the difference which reaches statistical significance. Then if we take into account reading speed, which was one of the variables used for classification, so it is rather obvious that we find differences where L types are consistently quicker than the other two types in text, word, and non-word reading. And as you saw in the previous slide, M types, as I anticipated, are the most impaired, both according to accuracy and according to speed. And this is the picture for writing to dictation. Again, although in this case differences don't reach statistical significance, you can see that M types tend to be the ones who have more difficulties in spelling or writing, be it words, non-words, or sentences. So now we can try to make a hypothesis about what makes M types worse than the other two types. And the first hypothesis that comes to mind is probably, okay, they may have a greater impairment in verbal memory, but they don't. Here you see there are no significant differences in verbal memory across the three groups, and also just looking at absolute values, M types are not the most impaired ones. The other idea that comes to mind is probably, okay, they probably have the greatest impairment in phonemic awareness, because we have always heard that phonemic awareness is the crucial function for producing reading disability. But M types, again, are not the ones who are most impaired in phonemic awareness. By contrast, it is L types who are the most impaired in phonemic awareness. And P types are the least impaired. All of them have difficulties with respect to normal readers. Okay, but we're just looking at subgroup differences now. So remember, L types are the quick but inaccurate readers. So it seems that difficulties in phonemic awareness tend to produce a pattern of reading disability characterized by good speed, but inaccuracy in reading. The other, say, the real differences that we find for M types being worse than the other subtypes, unexpectedly, has to do with non-verbal auditory processing. So these are accuracy scores, and you see that the bars of the M types are significantly lower than the other two subtypes in all of the conditions that had been proposed, so with short and with long intervals, with short and long duration of the stimuli. Whereas, and this is again unexpected, we don't find any similar impairment or any similar difference if we take into account the processing of verbal stimuli. So non-verbal, yes, but not with the verbal words to be processed. Here, we do not find any differences in discriminating or in categorizing. Although all the children, all the dyslexic children, again, are impaired with respect to normal readers. The other function in which we find a parallel of the greater impairment in reading in M types is callosal transfer of information. So M types have the greatest difficulties in transferring tactile information from one part of the brain to the other part. The green asterisks show an impairment or a higher amount of errors, bars are errors in this case, higher amount of errors with respect to normal readers, whereas the black asterisk shows a significant difference between P types and M types, where P types are not different from normal readers. So they are dyslexics, but their performance on callosal tasks is normal. So you could wonder where the point is of describing all these differences in subtypes. And the point is that these subtypes respond differently to treatment. For treatment, I mean treatment according to the balance model. The balance model proposes to stimulate the hemisphere which is less involved during reading. So to stimulate the left hemisphere for P types, the right hemisphere for L types, and for M types who have problems in both hemispheres or in both reading strategies, we decided to propose a pathway that goes along the developmental steps. So first, using the right hemisphere, stimulating the right hemisphere, and afterwards the left hemisphere. How do we achieve the aim of selectively stimulating one hemisphere? Through the use of computer programs. There are two main ways. One is a direct sending of the information to the target hemisphere, and the other way is to choose materials and tasks that, for their characteristics, tap functions which are subserved by either the right or the left hemisphere. You see, so I try to explain how is it possible to send information to one hemisphere. You have to control fixation, and to remember that the visual system is organized so that if your eyes are fixed on a central position, the information which is presented to the left visual field will be projected to the right hemisphere, and vice versa for the information presented to the right hemifield. So if you make a computer program which controls your fixation and which sends flashes, words to be read to either the left or the right of the fixation point for a very short time, too short for the eyes to move along the word and thus to change all the nice schema that we can see now and to send information to both hemispheres contemporarily, then you can achieve a selective stimulation of one hemisphere. So this was the standard program, sending information directly to the weak hemisphere, as has been shown during reading. We had manipulation of several variables, and so we created several treatment groups where we tried to understand better why this kind of treatment, as we had seen in previous studies, produces very positive effects on reading abilities. So we had a control group having reading training not related to the balance model, standard lateral stimulation according to the balance model, so visual hemisphere specific stimulation. Group 2, random lateral presentation, so words were flashed to either the left or the right in a random order. Central presentation with very short times so that the word was, so to say, split into two halves, each of which was sent to a different hemisphere. So the need to integrate the two pieces of information in order to read the word. Again, in group 4, central presentation, but with a longer time so that you could not say that there was any splitting of the word and any need to integrate information. Group 5, reversed lateral stimulation, so stimulating the strong hemisphere instead of the weak hemisphere. And the last group provided the stimulation of the right hemisphere only. It was only M types, and this in consideration of the evidence we had accumulated during years of the involvement of attentional abilities in reading. And as we know, attentional abilities are subserved or controlled mainly by the right hemisphere. And this are the results. This is a general view of the response to treatment. So you can see that both considering average response to treatment, putting together reading, writing, and reading speed, reading accuracy, and writing into one big variable. You can see that all the groups improve, and M-types, who are the most severely impaired, improve more than the others, which is already good news. And the green bars represent the percentage of children who have at least one standard deviation improvement in any of those abilities. And you can see that it is quite close to 1, so 200% of them in all subgroups. And now I will present differential effects. So I will not tell you whether the 3 groups improve or not after treatment. We will see that they all improve, but we are focusing on the existence of differences in the various treatment groups, taking into account P and L types as a first analysis and M types as a second analysis. And so I present only the improvements where there is a significant difference among treatment groups. The first difference concerns reading accuracy in L and P types. And you can see that visual hemisphere-specific stimulation, so the standard treatment according to the balance model, is the one who has the best results, the best effects on reading accuracy. A second significant difference concerns phonemic awareness. Again, it is the standard specific hemisphere stimulation according to the balance model to produce the best results. And interesting is to see that treatment with central presentation, which was the one tapping callosal integration of information, does not produce good results on phonemic awareness, which could be unexpected if we think that many models of neuropsychological functioning propose that callosal integration has to do with phonemic awareness. In this case, it does not produce any advantage. The other important and significant difference that we find is concerns writing, this time in M types. And we can see that it is central presentation with very short flashing times to produce the best results for reading, be it words, non-words, or sentences. If we specifically compare hemisphere-specific stimulation of the weak hemisphere as proposed by the balance model and reversed stimulation, so where the stimulated hemisphere was the, so to say, weak hemisphere, we can see that there is a clear advantage in addressing the weak hemisphere. And this is especially true for reading accuracy and phonemic awareness. We could wonder whether these quite striking differences in improvement of phonemic awareness, since we had put together P and L types, could hold only for one of the 2 subgroups, because in one subgroup, so in P types, we stimulated the left hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is the one which is usually described as the one where functions of phonemic awareness take place. So we might imagine that it is just the P types who improve more when the left hemisphere is stimulated. But if we compare the 2 groups separately, we can see that for L types, it is better to stimulate the right hemisphere as proposed by the balance model than the left hemisphere, and this is significantly better. Whereas for p-types, it is better to stimulate the left hemisphere than the right hemisphere. So it is not which hemisphere we stimulate, it is which subtype we are dealing with, okay, which makes the difference. And this is what I'm going to focus upon as the summary of these results. So we confirmed the role of hemisphere specificity. We showed the advantage of attacking the weaknesses rather than capitalizing on strengths, which could seem to make sense anyway. We also confirmed the advantage of simulating one hemisphere at a time for improving reading accuracy, and of stimulating both hemispheres contemporarily with short flashing times, so as to enhance the ability to integrate information from the two halves of the brain for improving orthography skills, so for improving writing abilities. And we remain with a question mark regarding phonemic awareness, which was shown to be improved, not especially by left hemisphere stimulation, and not especially by bilateral or bihemispheric stimulation, but, as I said, by hemisphere-specific stimulation. So the conclusions are that the results of intervention strongly depend on subtype, that the same kind of treatment can induce opposite effects in different subgroups, that the pattern of results is not easily to be led back to classical neuropsychological models of reading, that you have to take into account the differences which characterize dyslexics and the differences which are present among dyslexics subgroups. So the importance that when intervention is planned, you take into account individual characteristics, but you could say subtype characteristics, and you have to have very clear what you want to achieve, because as you saw, in this exactly the same kind of treatment, never focusing on writing, you have opposite effects with regard to reading accuracy, which is best improved with, as I said, unilateral stimulation, and to writing abilities, which are best improved with bilateral stimulation. So this was about my conclusion. Thank you.